YouTube, what it do to Down Home News TV. And like always, I'm late to the party. Pretty sure you've seen snippets of this already. But if not, join me as we go down this trail with Mr. Byron Donalds on the Breakfast Club. I can't believe I missed the interview. But let me plug in my computer charger real quick. We'll hop on into this thing. Is it charging? Don't look like it. It ain't bright. But yeah, Breakfast Club interview Byron Donalds. I didn't know he was from New York. But I guess it shows you how much I know. But yeah, Byron Donalds on the Breakfast Club. Let's check it out.
I know.
Well,
I didn't
know you from Brooklyn?
Yeah, Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Oh, Can't you tell us the meaning of the way he speaks? I'm like, he don't sound like nothing but a New Yorker.
Park Place, Troy, and Schenectady, man.
The way he walked in, I was like, he's New Yorker. But welcome, brother.
So how'd you become well, I guess because, in New York is considered such a liberal place. How did you become a conservative?
Oh, man. Politics came late for me in life.
You started as a Democrat, right?
Yeah, I was a registered Democrat. Didn't really care about politics. I think a lot of people like that in the country. They just register as whatever family or friends are, not really thinking about it. My career was finance. So I graduated with a degree in finance marketing from Florida State. I had too much fun at FAMU, so I had to transfer.
Okay.
So I transferred to FSU, got my degree there, started in my career, worked in banking, worked in insurance. And then through the financial collapse of 2008, my company had international clients. And they were saying, we need to get information for our clients so we can keep the investment going. So I started doing the research because I had worked in banking for 5 years. And when I did the research, one of the last things I did was watch the House Financial Services Committee in Congress. First time I ever watched a congressional committee. And I watched it, and really for me, it was that the members didn't know what they were talking about. I was like, who are these people? I was 29 at the time, 29, 30. And I'm thinking, who are these guys? They don't know what they're talking about. A lot of stuff doesn't make sense. And so that's really what started having me starting to think about politics. And, the journey kind of went from there. But I got to tell y'all both, my son, he's sitting at home, my son Mason, and he's a huge fan.
Oh,
so he listens all the time, so I got to give a shout to Mason.
Salute to Mason. Thank you, Mason.
Congressman, you just mentioned that you attended FAMU, but graduated from Florida State. We know that Donald Trump committed $255 million annually to HBCUs, while the Biden administration invested more than $16 billion since fiscal year 2021 to HBCUs, averaging more than $4 billion annually. They also challenged states through the Department of Education. That's the same department that Project 2025 wants to abolish, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to close a $12 billion gap between funding of land-grant institutions that are traditionally white institutions and historically Black colleges. FAMU is, of course, one of those schools, as you know. The letter to Governor DeSantis said in the last 30 years alone, an additional over $1.9 billion would have been available for FAMU had this disparity not existed. What obligation does Florida have to properly fund FAMU to ensure rattlers like yourself are properly educated with the resources they deserve?
Well, look, thank you for the question. I think that the disparities you talk about between some of the, I guess probably more prolific universities in our state like UF and FSU versus FAMU, and even from some of the younger universities like UWF, UNF, et cetera, is something that when I was in the state legislature, we actually talked a lot about. My last year in Tallahassee, there was a project for the Student Services Building. It was about a $25 million project. Myself and members on the Democrat side of the aisle, we worked with the leadership in Tallahassee and then Governor DeSantis to make sure that FAMU got the money they needed to build that project out completely. And so that's something specifically I worked on. I think going forward, that is something we got to definitely address. I totally agree with that. I think there's two issues, though, in higher education we got to also address. We do have a problem with the unaffordability of college. And a part of the reason why it is a problem is because so much money is poured into universities, and we have told so many kids in the United States that the only way to be successful is to go to college. I'm from the generation. I don't want to talk about your age, Angela. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to call you 32 years old, and I'm going to walk away.
I'm 44. I'll be 45 next month. It's
32 is way better. But anyway, You know
No,
what I'm
it's
saying?
not.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. But I think the point is that we have to start telling, young people that there's multiple ways to be successful.
Sean, what 44? Or maybe it's the makeup and the lighting. I don't know. Pretty good for age.
When you have a situation coming from high school where all your successes can only be found with a 4-year degree, what you also end up doing is you put upward pressure on the cost of college. But you're getting a lot of people coming out of college who have a degree that doesn't have economic value when there are multiple pathways for success in the United States. So funding that is on par through all universities is important. I do agree. But we also have to address the realities that pushing every high school student into college with the false reality that a college degree is going to make you successful is not going to help them for success long term, because they're going to be burdened with the cost of that degree, go into the real world, and then realize, hold on, wait a minute, I can't get a job with the degree I have. Not all degrees are the same. I believe personally an accounting degree, a finance degree like I have, an engineering degree, a law degree, that has more economic value overall in the economy than a marketing degree, which I also have, or a communications degree, or a psychology degree, or a philosophy degree, etc. If you can get into psychology and make that work for yourself. So I think there's multiple layers to college education that we need to address.
Let me ask you a question, right?
Yeah.
So I want to go back a little bit. So you were arrested before for marijuana.
Yeah.
You're arrested for bank fraud.
Yeah.
You're also of Caribbean descent.
Yeah.
Jamaican.
Yeah.
When you hear Donald Trump talk about some of the other brothers that were arrested and taking out that full ad in the paper, or you hear them talking about Haitian people eating dogs and cats, you still stand by them and what they believe, and if you do, why?
Well, a couple things.
Because you were given a second chance, because like we should have, like you should have been, but why do you still stand by them if you do?
Well, I think you also got to acknowledge that when he was president, he also did the First Step Act, which undid a lot of the issues with the '94 crime bill that a lot of politicians, including the current president, were for. He undid that when he was president of the United States. I think second chances are important in society. I think everybody's afforded them. You know, what happened with the Central Park Five, I was probably 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade when that was going down in New York.
Yep.
I can't really speak to that, but what I also
it was all over the paper.
I know it was everywhere. You couldn't escape it.
We were around the same
age,
so we seen it everywhere.
You couldn't escape it. But what I would also add is that in 2000, Donald Trump was a member of the Reform Party. Most people don't talk about this. He was a member of the Reform Party. When David Duke joined the Reform Party, he left. And he famously said, I can't be associated with that party because they let David Duke come in. That man is a Klansman. When he bought Mar-a-Lago, he desegregated Mar-a-Lago. But at the time when he bought it, only white people were allowed in Mar-a-Lago. He desegregated that, allowed black people and Jewish people to be a part of Mar-a-Lago. So I think that when you start going down the road of the past, you have to take a man in his totality. I know the man today. And then when you couple that with the economic policies, the energy policies, the foreign policy, we have to acknowledge the reality that in the world today, the United States is in the midst of two conflicts, not directly, but indirectly. We just sent troops over into the Middle East because of the growing conflict with our ally Israel, having to essentially secure its sovereignty and its protection from Hezbollah and Hamas. Well, when Donald Trump was president, we didn't have to do any of that. So I acknowledge the stuff that you're talking about that happened in the past, but I think you have to take a man on the full record. When he was president, he did release a lot of black people from prison. He did that. He did try to reform some of the criminal justice system. He did that as well. And so that work is just as important as something that he might have said back during the Central Park Five.
I acknowledge the First Step Act, but when you said he undid the '94 crime bill, what do you mean?
What I mean is that the reforms in the First Step Act undid in part some of the issues in the '94 crime bill. Not totally. Not totally. It dealt with the sentencing of those people who either had their sentences reduced or were released, and their convictions were in line with the '94 crime bill and the way criminal statutes were written under that piece of legislation.
And his thoughts on the whole Haitians eating.
Go ahead, Angela. What's that?
Oh, what's up, Angela?
Sorry, just on this same point, you talked about taking the man in his totality.
Yeah.
So one of those things in his totality is what happened on January 6th, which was your first term in Congress.
Yeah.
Do you think he should be held accountable? Donald Trump should be held accountable for his role in the January 6th insurrection?
Well, I mean, listen, first of all, I would tell you that everybody's responsible for their own actions. Just like I'm not going to blame friends or blame anybody else for the things I've done wrong in my life, I'm not going to put that on him. I'm not gonna run around and blame Bernie Sanders for the fact that Steve Scalise was shot. Because if you go back and look at when Steve Scalise, who's the current leader in the House of Representatives, who almost died at a congressional baseball practice. Hold on, I'm gonna explain this. So I'm gonna come back to January 6th.
Yeah, please do.
No, I will, of course. The shooter that almost killed Steve Scalise, the Republican leader, he said vehemently that the reason why he went to the congressional baseball practice of Republicans to shoot it up was because he felt that Republicans were going to take away health care. And what he had heard in his rhetoric was that was dangerous, and these Republicans had to be stopped. So I'm going to translate that to January 6th. The shooter is the one that perpetrated that crime. I'm not going to put that on Bernie Sanders, who he cited for the rhetoric around why he went to the congressional baseball practice. And that's a shooter that almost killed Steve Scalise. Let me translate. Donald Trump authorized 10,000 National Guard troops. I'm on the oversight committee. He actually authorized 10,000 troops on January 4th, 2 days before January 6th, obviously. So if you're going to say that you incited an insurrection, then how are you also going to authorize 10,000 National Guard troops to be at the Capitol? Are you inciting or are you not? Because the record is he authorized the troops. Nancy Pelosi and Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., did not want the troops at the Capitol. Muriel Bowser signed a letter on January 5th wanting the National Guard troops to be on traffic duty in D.C. Now, here's the funny thing about January 5th, 2021, is that nobody was in D.C. because D.C.'s rules around COVID-19 had the entire city shut down. The streets were empty during this time. So the National Guard that was authorized by Donald Trump were on traffic duty when there was no traffic, when they could have been at the Capitol.
I can tell you right now, even with all those facts, it's like a roadblock to the members of the Breakfast Club. No disrespect, but I do not see how you could just block out all this evidence that he is putting forward and still have the opinions that they have. Like I said, I try to look at all sides of a story. I try to think from the left perspective and the right, independent, whatever. And that's how I make my decisions typically. Sometimes I don't have all information, but let's just see what they're going to say.
That's the history of January 6th. So your question is, well, did he incite a riot? Well, I never seen somebody incite a riot.
What I said, and I just, because I know,
I don't want to cut you off. I'm going to make one point. I'm going to make one point. I don't want to cut you off.
No, but I want to make sure that you're addressing the right point, because I actually did not use that language. What I asked you was, should Donald Trump be held accountable for his role in January 6th? And so what I think is important is,
what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me later, but his comparison to the Steve Scalise situation, when he said that he doesn't hold Bernie Sanders accountable for his rhetoric that ultimately made the guy go shoot up the baseball game targeting Republicans. That should have been the end of the discussion, but yeah.
Is to compare this to Steve Scalise being shot after someone wanted health care versus the rhetoric, the very dangerous rhetoric that Donald Trump spouted on January 6th, where more than 1,200 people have been charged in nearly all 50 states for their role, and 140 police officers were assaulted. The same police officers that your party has said they want qualified immunity for, and Donald Trump, because we're looking at the totality of the person, has said they should have full immunity, right? And when you think about the number of police officers who would get full immunity for their role in killing and being violent with people in our community like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Philando Castile, Charlene Lyles, Manny Ellis. Is that really the kind of rhetoric that you want to push, especially at the Breakfast Club?
So if you haven't, well, I haven't uploaded it yet, but I spoke about the qualified immunity situation in my Tyree Nichol verdict story that I covered. But yeah, if you haven't checked it out, well, when you get a chance, check it out, and you'll see what I'm talking about. This is what I was talking about.
Well, hold on a second, Angela, because you brought in like 4 different topics now. Do you want to talk
No,
about
I
Trump?
didn't. What I brought in was January 6th responsibility, police accountability, and I used examples of why they should be held accountable. But you talked about how fantastic he was with the crime bill, which I object, but I'll let you finish your point.
Fair.
You also have not acknowledged the fact that this man was vehemently opposed to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And you all are supposed to be the party that protects law enforcement, where over 150 police officers were assaulted that day on January 6th.
When it comes to, excuse me, bills, the reason why I would more than likely think he would be opposed to situations like the George Floyd bill is the things that are attached to it. I forgot what year it was, but it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago when Nancy Pelosi was standing in front of the Senate or House, one of the two. But she was saying we gotta pass these bills to find out what's in it. You have to pass a bill to find out what is in it. Now, I know when it comes to like your cell phone, when you're uploading apps to your phone, you don't read all the written agreement paperwork, but something that's going to affect the whole country when you're passing these laws and bills and you have all these separate attachments, agendas kind of weaved into the fabric of the bill. I don't know, people. Doesn't make sense, but let's continue.
Because of Donald Trump's
Okay,
rhetoric.
so let me respond to a couple things. Number one, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. There were actually 2 bills that were moving through the United States Senate that year. There was the George Floyd Policing Act that you discussed, and there was the bill that was written by Senator Tim Scott. They were both moving. They're both moving through the Senate, right? The Tim Scott bill is the one that could have got signed into law. It was essentially a mirror image of the George Floyd bill, except for qualified immunity. The difference between those 2 bills, and Angela, you just acknowledged it, the only difference between those 2 bills was qualified immunity. The issue with qualified immunity is very simple. If you remove qualified immunity from policing, you're going to have less officers on the street. Police officers make what? $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. They have most law enforcement has about 40 million or more encounters every single year with citizens. If you remove qualified immunity, I'm telling you this right now because I've talked with law enforcement officers all across the country, not the chiefs, the officers. They will not be working these communities. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm from Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I may not have always loved having the police in my neighborhood, and that's just a thing from a kid. I may not have always loved it, but when I needed them, they were there. And a lot of our officers today, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're white. So removing qualified immunity only lowers the number of officers in communities. What we're seeing right now is a movement of policing from states where they're not really respecting law enforcement to states where they do, or there's not that moral support for law enforcement. I was in my district yesterday. I was talking with an officer who's from Philadelphia. He was a Philadelphia officer. He now is a Fort Myers officer. I asked him, I was like, well, why'd you make the move? He goes, because up there was no support for me as an officer for what I love to do, which is serve my community. So I said, enough is enough. I'm gonna move. He went to Florida. My sheriff in Florida, he's like, I have more applications coming from officers who are in states or in localities where they're not getting the moral support or whatever they need to continue to do their job day in, day out. And so they're leaving. Well, who does that hurt? That hurts. Who does that really hurt, though, Charlemagne?
Yeah,
because
if
if
you
you don't have officers if you don't have officers on the streets or officers, in urban areas, who's really left in that lurch?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what does qualified immunity have to do with having less police officers?
Because the economic incentive of qualified immunity means that your personal assets aren't gone after if something goes wrong. So, you're in business. Do you get involved in a project or a deal that leaves you massively exposed financially? You may, depending on your passion for that project, but then you also sit back and think, now, wait a minute, if something goes wrong, I'm going to be held massively liable. Maybe I need to do
when
something
we're
else
saying
in my
something
life.
goes wrong, we're talking about people getting violently hurt or killed.
Yeah, clearly.
And I named
when it's
people
clear,
that you brushed over.
But it's clear,
I'm
when
not
somebody
brushing over
clearly
that.
violates a constitutional right.
And when you violate a constitutional right, qualified immunity doesn't apply to you. And that's what I'm talking about. It does not. And Angela, don't do that. It does not.
I thought that was the definition. I thought that was the definition.
No, it does
I thought
not.
that was the definition.
No,
of
it does
qualified
not. If you carry yourself outside of the confines of your training and the protocols of that department, qualified immunity doesn't apply to you. It does not.
That's not true.
That is very true. That is very true.
That is patently
That
false.
is no, it's patently true, and we need to make sure we have that accurate. We cannot make that statement because you have a lot of officers out here who do their job with honor and dignity and respect for the people that they serve.
Listen, qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that protects government officials from civil lawsuits when they perform their jobs unless they clearly violate a constitutional right.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And what is a violation of that right is when they're outside the norms of their training and the protocols of that department or that agency.
But here's the main thing, because we can actually go past qualified immunity because this is the place where you've refused to.
Oh, crap. Let's skip over that part now.
Answer both on Donald Trump's accountability and on the law enforcement that you love so dearly.
Right.
What we know is that he's seeking full immunity, like the same immunity he now has because of the Supreme Court. Because of the corruption of the Supreme Court, we have now gone beyond civil presidential immunity to criminal presidential immunity. He would like to give that same immunity to law enforcement. True or false?
Well, let's expand that a couple things.
True or false?
You can't ask a true or false, Angela, because you got to explain the details. No, see, this is the problem.
I don't want you to explain the details because when you explain
Why you
the
don't
details,
want people to hear the details, Angela? The details are what the things that matter. You got to explain the details, or then you just talk. You're just talking,
and then explain.
If you don't explain the details, then you're just talking.
Yeah, you don't want to say that because you know that it's not true. So
that is not true. You want a true or false statement,
Congressman. I want to know.
I don't want to argue with you. I want to explain the facts. Angela, I don't want to argue with you.
I would like to know if you've ever experienced racism in this country, Congressman.
Yeah, actually, I have.
Okay. Do you believe America is a racist country?
No, I don't.
Okay, I believe that that's true because you said in an op-ed on Fox News, as a Black conservative, I, like Senator Scott, agree, and our two lives and the lives of many Black men and women like us are living proof that America is indeed no longer a racist nation and by far the best place to reach your fullest potential. And so here's my question. You did, however, vote to support the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, along with every member of the House except for 3 Republicans. So I appreciate your bipartisanship there. And what I do know as well, because America is in fact a racist country, was founded on such principles. Black men were lynched by the carceral state last week. I'm sure you've heard of Marcellus Williams by now in Missouri, who was convicted by a nearly all-white jury, and Freddie Owens in South Carolina, who was executed despite his friend recanting testimony that Owens was not in fact there. This is the same state, by the way, that allowed for a firing squad as an execution option. Black people are about 7.5 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder in the United States than are white folks, and about 80% more likely to be innocent than others convicted of murder, according to a 2022 report by the National Registry of Exonerations. So please tell me how America is not a racist country.
First thing I would say is that our past is a dark one. It really is. We can't walk away from that. We had whole laws that were subjugating Black people in the South of this nation for decades after the Civil War. We can't walk away from that one. I believe that in America, we have great people in this country, and we have some people, quite frankly, that even I can't stand. But they're the vast, vast, vast minority of people in our country. Most people just want to live in harmony and peace. That's what they really want. I think the important thing to acknowledge today is what's going to help Black people going forward. And what's going to help Black people moving forward is economic policy. It's actually wide open energy policy so we can be energy dominant. It's, yes, securing our southern border because we have a situation right now where, yeah, there are more than 15 million illegal aliens in the country. Where do they reside? Mostly in sanctuary cities like New York. Where are they at? Sanctuary states like Illinois, like California. What's happening in those cities? Hospital systems are overrun. Why are they overrun? Because you have people in the country illegally who don't have resources, so they're going into the emergency room. What are they taking up? They're taking resources from poor people in our country, whether they're Black, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're white. That's wrong. What about education? We have a situation where in too many inner cities, kids are not reading at grade level, or they don't have math skills at grade level. How does that help them excel and achieve? I don't want to discount what Angela is saying. I don't. I acknowledge the issue of our nation, but we always are trying to strive to be the more perfect union. So in 2024, what are the economic policies? What are the national security policies? What are the border security policies that are gonna make our country thrive? So whether you black, Hispanic, or white, you could thrive.
Why?
And so I think it's
So
important.
then would you have to say that if it wasn't a racist country, whether you're black, white, or Hispanic, you could thrive?
No.
Are we thriving? Are members in your
I would
state,
argue
black
we're
folks
not.
in your
I would
state
argue we're
thriving?
not really thriving right now. This inflation, which by the way was brought to us by Kamala Harris, has really slowed down people from being able to excel.
By Kamala?
Yes.
Vice president.
Charlemagne.
It's still a president.
Charlemagne, listen, man. When Joe Biden wanted to do his American Rescue Plan, Kamala Harris was the tie-breaking vote in the United States Senate. She broke the tie that started this inflation that has hurt so many people in our country. Everybody listening to your show, it's not true?
First of all, it's true that it's a tie-breaking vote.
You sure you want to go there?
She kind of looks like Kamala, huh? A little bit.
Go outside,
What you
Congressman,
pulling
when
out?
you go outside.
You sure
in
you want to
your
go there?
district,
Okay, let's go.
You had it
You
pretty
got
bad.
notes. You got notes, Angela, right?
That's fine. I have notes
I'm
too.
gonna give it.
and
I'm gonna
the
give it to
biggest note I
Charlemagne.
have today
I'm gonna give it to
is
Charlemagne.
that
I
on
don't even
every
want to hold
question
it
I've asked,
because Angela,
for
hold on now.
for every infrastructure project in your community,
You can go to
should
third
go
page,
out
just the
and
highlighted
thank
portion.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Congress that voted for the American Rescue Plan.
Angela,
That's what should be happening.
Larry Summers wrote an op-ed back in 2021. Larry Summers was the Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton, and he was an economic advisor to Barack Obama. He said that the American Rescue Plan that Joe Biden wanted, that Kamala Harris was the tie-breaking vote in the United States Senate, would create a massive inflation that we have not seen in a generation. Well, guess what? Larry Summers was correct. You know who also was correct, Angela? I was, because I was in the Budget Committee when they brought the bill. And I said in that committee, it's going to cause massive inflation. That's what happened. So the problem we have in our economy today is that prices have gone up massively. Wages adjusted for inflation is down. People's pocketbooks are hurting. But we have a presidential election in 40 days. So, and I'm gonna ask Envy this question. Envy, you're in the housing business as well. I know because I watch. I listen to the show.
Interviewed.
No, I'm just asking them a question. Chill, Angela. So I listen to the show. I know you do a lot of business in housing. Mm-hmm. Would you hire somebody that broke up stuff in one of your houses to fix the other houses?
No.
Exactly. She broke the economy.
I'm not going to do this morning, Byron.
Why are you not going to do this, Angela? Because I'm bringing facts and not. Hold on now. So now I'm bringing facts and you don't want to do it no more? Come on now, Angela. That's not right. I'm bringing facts. I thought we were going to have a fact-based conversation. I want to have a fact-based conversation.
You wanted to bring up votes, and so let's talk about votes.
Go ahead.
You have a 96% voting record with Heritage Action.
Angela, I'm not running for president, but we could talk about that.
For those who are listening,
yeah.
Heritage Action is a part of the Heritage Foundation, which is the architect of Project 2025, which we can talk about more later. Okay. You voted no on HR 8404, which would provide federal recognition and protection to interracial couples. And that actually is a law that would benefit you, Congressman, given your marriage. You voted no HR 6878 on requiring the Bureau of Prisons to provide incarcerated women with certain pregnancy-related care, including sexually transmitted infectious testing, contraception, appropriate housing, bedding, clothing, access to hydration and restrooms, prenatal vitamins and other appropriate conditions of confinement, screening and care for high-risk pregnancy, substance use, and mental health support, including postpartum depression and prenatal education. The list goes on, and it would limit the use of solitary confinement for pregnant women. You voted no twice on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would have restored the protections originally enshrined in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which I've heard you tout. You also voted no on HR 3233, which established the bipartisan commission to investigate the terrorist and insurrectionist attack on January 6th at the Capitol. So you want to talk about voting?
Sure.
Please explain why you would vote so clearly against the interests of people who look just like you and I.
So the first two bills you talk about, I'll actually have to go back and see it because A lot of problems with some of these bills are all of the other things that get put into them, not just the things that you're talking about. Specific to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the reason why I did not vote for that bill is because that bill would reinstitute what's called pre-clearance. Right now,
Yes.
hold on, man, Angela, you won't let me talk? Here we go. Here we go.
You.
Here we
Is
go.
that okay? Just say yes.
Okay, here we go. So check
Are
this
you
out.
okay?
Pre-clearance, right now, under federal law, really by Supreme Court precedent, is no longer the law of the land. The reason why that is because there's not been, over the last 30 years in elections, there's not been cases, or there's not been any specific cases around why you need pre-clearance in the first place, like was needed back in 1965, where you did have counties that were systematically discriminating against black people. So the plaintiffs could not prove at any point in the last 30 years where you still needed pre-clearance. I live in a pre-clearance county. Collier County, Florida is a pre-clearance county. I've lived Collier County for 23 years now, 23 years. There's never been an issue with me casting a vote in Collier County, Florida at any time over the last 23 years. And that's before I became an elected official. That's when I showed up down there working the Cracker Barrel, being a waiter and just figuring out how to make ends meet. And I could still cast my ballot. So every other protection under the Civil Rights Act of 1965 is still law today. What my Democratic colleagues want is they want national pre-clearance so that if any jurisdiction, whether if they were a historically discriminatory jurisdiction or not, if they made a change in their procedure, like reshifting a precinct, deciding to shrink or expand precincts, that would actually have to go to the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department for approval before they can make those changes. Now, why is that not important today? More people are voting by mail. So you have a situation where local election jurisdictions are shrinking precincts or resizing precincts or putting two precincts together because they don't have the volume of people going to cast ballots in those precincts. You're now telling me that you have to now go to the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department to get approval to put two voting precincts together? That's why the John Lewis Act, and all due respect to John Lewis, great man, phenomenal career, but that's why that bill of putting pre-clearance in nationally, even in jurisdictions where there were no historical discrimination of black people, is not necessary legislation. Though.
Well, YouTube, I'm glad I enjoy conversations like this where they have one side, especially like the Breakfast Club, bringing on people from the other side to clear the air, so, so to say. But I enjoy, I guess you could call it debates, conversations like this. So far in the video, almost 30 minutes in, it's almost past my bedtime. Let me know what y'all think about this video. What side do y'all think had the better points and comebacks? I'm not saying it's based just off of the oohs and ah moments, but who do you think made a better representation of their party and why? And tomorrow I'm going to do the other half of the video. But if not, I'll leave the link in the description somewhere so y'all could go watch the full video on your own account if you would like. Down Home News TV, I'm Dre. Y'all have a good one.